Welcome to See Crime Stories, true stories of the missing and the pursuit of answers. Forest Hills, Nashville. Mid-August 1996. A 33-year-old mother of two, Janet Gail Levine March, stops answering calls. There is no 911 alert, no neighbors reporting a disturbance. What we do have is a last known location, her home, and, 3 weeks later, a stationary witness, her Volvo 850 found backed into a space at the Brixworth Apartments about 5 miles away. Investigators work the case as an absence first, not a homicide. That matters. No blood pattern analysis, no bullet trajectory, no immediate trace chemistry from a defined assault scene. Instead, they start with what's available and verifiable. The Volvo becomes the primary physical anchor. Its position is controlled, the perimeter is contained, and the vehicle is processed for stillness indicators, dust and pollen film on the exterior, cobweb strands in the wheel wells, surface rust on the brake rotors. Those are timestamps without a clock, the kind that contradict travel stories. A car intended for a 12-day road break should not look like it hasn't moved. Inside the home, detectives document a normal Thursday that stops suddenly. They inventory routine objects, check for packed luggage, scan calendars, and pull phone activity logs. Voluntary disappearance is not dismissed, it's measured against behavior baselines. Friends say Janet was organized, direct, and in close touch with her family. Banking and card activity is reviewed. If she chose to step away, she left no digital footprint to support it. Back at Brixworth, the parking choice raises secondary questions. Why back into a slot you don't use daily? Why choose a lot with quick access to a main corridor but limited sight lines from the street? Those choices can reflect staging, designed to be seen eventually, but not soon. Technicians diagram entry and exit paths, consider whether a bicycle could have been used after the drop-off, and collect trace. Nothing here proves violence. But everything here pushes against the idea of a spontaneous vacation. Janet is not a case file first. She is an illustrator, a daughter, a mother. That's relevant because routine is evidence. In towns like Nashville's quiet suburbs, disappearances don't blend into noise, they stand out because daily patterns are consistent. Investigators build their opening theory set from that consistency: last known alive at home, a car that appears to have sat for days, and a clock that began ticking on August 15, 1996. Early on, the case is defined by what it lacks: a recovered body, an obvious crime scene, and by what it has: a vehicle scene and a timeline that doesn't match the story of a long, voluntary break. The data aligns too cleanly in one direction. Sometimes, that's the problem. Forest Hills, Nashville. Investigators return to the last place anyone can put Janet Gail Levine March on the clock, her home. No 911 call, no forced entry, no overturned furniture. The assignment is simple and hard at the same time: treat an ordinary suburban house as a time capsule and decide where the timeline stops. They start with routine. Mail stacked by date. A calendar that shows upcoming plans, none crossed out. Children's schedules taped inside a cabinet. In cases like this, routine matters because it's measurable. Detectives verify appointments, call friends who expected to see Janet, and look for any message that announces an extended break. Nothing credible signals a planned 12-day absence. That doesn't prove a crime, it tells you the story needs more pressure testing. Packing behavior is checked next. If a parent leaves for nearly 2 weeks, something usually moves: luggage from a closet, travel-sized toiletries, prescription refills. Officers photograph shelves before anything is touched and compare against purchase records. The scene reads lived in, not staged for departure, and that difference pushes the team back to phone and money. They subpoena call histories and banking activity tied to mid-August 1996. No useful travel trail appears. For viewers who follow a lot of true crime cases, you know this drill: when life stops but the house doesn't talk, you lean on data. Inside the studio space where Janet worked on illustration, investigators document works in progress. Open projects matter, they anchor intention. People who vanish voluntarily tend to close loops, tell a client, pause a job, leave a note. Here, in progress stays in progress. That isn't drama, it's context that narrows the reasonable explanations. Neighbors are canvassed for sight, sound, and time. Late evening activity? Unusual vehicles? A delivery that didn't make sense? Reports are thin. No one logs a disturbance on or after August 15, 1996. Trash pickup schedules are cross-checked because curbside can be a gold mine, receipts, packaging, anything with a date. Nothing recovered changes the trajectory. The house remains what it is, the last known location, not a confirmed crime scene. Detectives then deconstruct the "she left after an argument" account. They don't argue with it, they test it. Was there a bag she favored for overnight trips? Is it missing? Was there an itinerary friend groups knew about? Did she fuel up the Volvo in the days before? Each question is designed to generate documentary proof. Each answer leans toward absence. You don't build guilt from that. You build a decision about where to hunt next. Because there's no blood pattern or obvious violence, the team leans on sequence: who was where, when, and how long. Call detail records show gaps. Friends describe unanswered phones. Family emphasizes this isn't how Janet operated. In towns like this, murders aren't just crimes, they tear at the fabric of a quiet community. But the job here isn't to name a villain, it's to lock the times. The last confirmed contact points to the home. After that, the narrative splits between what's said and what can be corroborated. The search warrant is disciplined. Photographs, notes, and itemized lists are taken. A few household cleaners are documented, common products, nothing conclusive by themselves. Windows and doors are checked for signs of forced entry, there are none. The kitchen shows meals prepared close to the date. Children's items are arranged for everyday use. The home tells a story of a life paused, not packed. By the time the team steps back onto the driveway, they've learned what the house can teach. It isn't offering a forensic declaration, but it anchors the clock. If you map cases that resolve years later without a body, this is a familiar starting line: no definitive scene, just a place and a date. The question becomes how that house connects to the Volvo discovered 3 weeks later. The path between them is only 5 miles. The gap between them is the whole case. From a human standpoint, that's the part most families never forget. When someone vanishes and there isn't a room you can point to, you live inside the uncertainty. That is why investigators are methodical here. They don't fill in blanks with emotion. They isolate variables they can prove: last known location at home, no documented preparations for a long trip, no digital or financial activity consistent with travel. The next step is inevitable: leave the house, follow the path, and see whether the vehicle can answer what the living room can't. The data align too cleanly inside the home. Sometimes, that's the problem. When a place is quiet, you look for the thing that should have made noise and didn't. The next push isn't about scenes, it's about proof. The case team opens with a simple question: if Janet Gail Levine March left on August 15, 1996 for a nearly 2-week break, what evidence exists that a trip started? They work it like an audit. Subpoenas go to phone carriers for call detail records and to the bank for checking, savings, and credit activity. A travel departure leaves ripples: fuel purchases, ATM withdrawals, long-distance charges, motel authorizations, airline bookings, even a postal hold mail request. Investigators arrange those datasets by day and hour. The result is clear: routine local charges stop, and nothing credible pops up to replace them. They pull landline logs from the house and nearby payphone lists that were common in the mid-90s. The point isn't to invade privacy, it's to verify movement. Voluntary trips generate contact: calls to friends, a quick arrived safe check-in, confirmation calls to hotels or car rental desks. Analysts read the tapes of numbers with the dispassion the job requires. No pattern matches a traveler's footprint after August 15th. It's not dramatic, but it narrows choices: either a traveler left an invisible trail, or there was no legitimate trip to begin with. The team expands outward. Airlines operating from Nashville International in that window are asked for passenger manifests under Janet's name and common misspellings. Nothing useful lands. Bus lines and car rental agencies return the same answer. DMV checks verify no recent title transfers or temporary tags that would explain an alternate vehicle. Toll authorities in neighboring states, where systems exist, show no hits on the Volvo's plate during the alleged break. In cases like this, absence is evidence. It doesn't convict, it contradicts. Friends and clients provide a different kind of data point. Janet's illustration projects show deadlines and ongoing drafts. Investigators collect calendars, appointment cards, and messages from August to September. No note announces a pause. No colleague remembers a heads up about leaving town. That matters because unreliable narrators miss details, reliable schedules don't. When a professional steps away for 12 days, someone usually knows. Detectives revisit the argument and departure account with specific tests. Did she withdraw cash beforehand? Was a favorite bag missing? Did she refill prescriptions early? These are low-drama checks that either support or erode the narrative. The answers line up on one side. A discretionary trip of that length should trigger at least one of those markers. It doesn't. The data lines up too cleanly around stillness. That didn't solve the case. It told the team we're not to waste time. They also reconstruct the window between August 15th and the day the Volvo is logged in the Brixworth Apartments lot on September 7th. That 3-week span becomes a blank zone the case has to fill. Officers map known sightings, review neighborhood delivery routes, and look for any camera systems still functioning in 1996 that might have captured street movement. It's a long shot. Most systems from that era are low retention or low resolution. But the exercise matters because it drives the next step. Get eyes on the actual lot where the car turns up and verify how long it could have sat without being noticed. Before they move to Brixworth, the team checks for a second possibility. Could someone else have been driving Janet's accounts, making tiny purchases or calls to create the illusion of life? That fraud pattern shows up in some missing person investigations. Analysts look for tick marks of minimal charges that feel performative. They find none. The ledger is quiet. If a departure happened, it left no paper trail and no digital echo. All of this is procedural, not theatrical, and that's the point. When you don't have a defined assault scene and you don't have a recovered body, you build a case from negative space and corroboration. You test stories against records and ignore what can't be proven. From a human angle, it's punishing work for a family. People want a single document or a single call that explains everything. What the records say here is simpler and harder. Normal life stops on August 15th, and nothing credible indicates a planned journey after that. The team's next move is now obvious. The house fixed the last known location. The records erased the 12-day trip. The car's recovery point is the only remaining structure on the map. They'll walk the distance between the home and Brixworth, minute by minute, and decide whether the placement signals random parking or intentional staging. In towns like this, tragedies don't blend in, they live in the gaps. The job is to close the gap without guessing. The distance from the Forest Hills home to the Brixworth Apartments is about 5 miles. Investigators drive it slowly, then at commuter speed, then at night. They're not looking for drama, they're testing how a car gets placed and how a driver leaves without attracting attention. Residential turns feed into a corridor with quick access to Brixworth. From there, the lot opens behind a low line of trees and a brick building. Entry and exit can be done in under 90 seconds if you know where you're going. They reconstruct the route with a stopwatch and a city map from 1996. The path allows the driver to avoid the busiest intersections and reach Brixworth without passing long stretches of storefront glass. That matters for one reason: fewer chances to be noticed. The lot itself has a structure that benefits a planner. You can pull in, steer left, and back into a slot near the middle row. It isn't invisible, but it's delayed visibility. A car parked there will be found eventually, not necessarily tomorrow. Backed-in parking is a decision point. Most residents front park for convenience. Backing in gives a clean exit when you return, and a cleaner exit on foot if you don't. Detectives diagram how a driver could stop, shift, back neatly, shut off the engine, and step away. Headlights would wash the brick for a few seconds, then cut. If you're staking out a staging location, you want a placement that looks ordinary in the rear view but takes weeks to raise concern. Bricksworth fits. Managers and tenants are canvassed. In 1996, lots like this often rely on informal monitoring. Residents notice a car only after it overstays. No assigned tag system, no gatehouse, no nightly patrol sweeping plates. Some remember a dark sedan that came and went, none remember the Volvo arriving. That's not surprising. A vehicle that appears well parked doesn't trigger curiosity. It blends until a deadline, inspection day, a tow sweep, or a resident finally reports that car. Officers chart footpaths that allow a driver to leave the lot without circling back to the street. Sidewalks connect to a cut-through behind a hedge and out to a side road where a second vehicle could wait. There's also a simple option: walk to the main road and keep going. In both scenarios, the Volvo becomes a prop, an object meant to be found, one that says she left while the rest of the record says the opposite. The car's orientation supports that read. Backing in hides the plate from casual drive-by view. It also narrows the angle at which passers-by can see anything left on the seats. Detectives note the slot sight lines, minimal direct view from the leasing office, quick shadow after dusk, and just enough foot traffic to normalize its presence. The choice doesn't solve the case. It compresses the window. If the Volvo sat here undisturbed for days, the drop-off likely happened close to nightfall, when a careful driver can position a vehicle without audience. They test a practical question: could a person leave Bricksworth by bicycle? A bike offers a fast, quiet exit back toward the Forest Hills area or toward a second rendezvous. Investigators measure the ride time on a comparable route. It's doable. Whether that happened is a question for later witnesses, but the logistics align. The point isn't to prove a method, it's to eliminate excuses that don't fit the map. A second pass checks for simple staging tells: is the parking spot one a resident would choose, or one a visitor would pick to avoid a specific building? The answer leans toward visitor logic. The slot isn't the closest to any unit entrance, it's central. A resident who parks daily tends to claim a habitual corner. A visitor who wants neutral ground backs into the middle. The lot search adds one more layer: discovery timing. 3 weeks pass between the disappearance date and the recovery of the Volvo. In communities like this, that gap is normal for an unfamiliar car that looks properly parked. The takeaway is basic and powerful. Whoever placed the Volvo counted on ordinary human behavior. People notice what blocks them, not what rests in its lane. Families watching this kind of case often ask how a car can sit that long. The answer is that lots aren't built for suspicion. They're built for convenience. From a human angle, that choice is painful. A vehicle that once carried school runs and errands is converted into evidence, a message without a sender. But the message still informs the search. It tells the team they're not hunting a random disappearance across state lines. They're dealing with a local chain, last known at home, then 5 miles, then this lot. Narrow map, narrow window. With this chapter, the investigation earns a direction. The 12-day break has no support in the records. The car's location offers a workable sequence: placement in a non-assigned lot, backed in to delay attention, and an exit route that doesn't require a witness. Next steps are clear: corroborate the timing with any tenant recollections, check maintenance logs for tow sweeps, and compare the likely drop-off window with known movements on the calendar. A good case reduces possibilities one by one until the only story left is the one that matches the evidence. At Bricksworth, the Volvo stops being a symbol and becomes a clock. The team treats the car like a sealed room. You don't guess what happened inside, you measure what time did to it outside. Technicians start with the obvious and work toward the precise. Dust and pollen on horizontal surfaces, cobweb strands along the wheel wells, and light rust film across the brake rotors, each is a small, boring truth. Together, they tell you how long a vehicle has likely sat without moving. The first pass is photographic. Wide shots establish placement. Controlled close-ups capture surfaces likely to change first when a car is driven. If the Volvo had been moved even a short distance in recent days, the rotors would show clean arcs where pads scraped off oxidation. They don't. The film is uniform. That doesn't give a minute-by-minute stamp, but it supports what the lot suggested yesterday. The Volvo wasn't arriving and leaving on multiple nights. It arrived and stayed. Cobweb threads are next. On a car that moves, those strands break. Here, they bridge from the lip of the fender liner to the tire. They're delicate but reliable when read with caution. One or two strands can form quickly, but multiple threads running in different directions usually require time and still air. That aligns with a car positioned and left, not a car used and returned. Brixworth isn't a wind tunnel. The lot's central rows block heavy gusts. The webbing makes sense. Dust and pollen patterns are checked last. Horizontal edges, wiper rests, mirror caps, the trunk lip hold the most detail. If a hand had wiped a section, you'd see a swipe. If rain had washed it, you'd see streaking. The patterns on the Volvo are even and unbroken. It's the kind of thing you could miss if you want drama. Investigators don't. They photograph, log, and move on. Timing is the hard part. No technician can stand in court and say it sat exactly X days. But you can bracket. You use the car's last known normal usage before August 15, 1996, compared to the uniform rotor film, and match that to weather logs that reflect precipitation and typical pollen load for late August. If there had been significant rain or if someone had moved the car enough to warm the brakes, the rotor surface would look different. It doesn't. That puts the likely drop-off closer to the disappearance date than to the day of recovery. In plain English, the Volvo was probably placed in that lot early and left alone. Now the placement reads differently. Backed-in parking wasn't about convenience, it bought time. A clean line, centered in a non-assigned row, delayed complaint and avoided tow action. The slot's angle hid the plate on casual drive-thrus. If the goal was to make sure the Volvo would eventually be noticed but not right away, the plan worked. For families who've lived through cases like this, that delay hurts. It often feels like the universe ignored a signal. But lots aren't built to solve crimes. They're built to store cars. There's a second question to settle before leaving the scene behind. Could someone have visited the Volvo, opened it, moved items, or adjusted anything, without leaving a disturbance that would reset the stillness clock? Here, technicians rely on the integrity of seals and dust on door gaskets. Continuous dust along the rubber and no fresh prints at the most common contact points argue against post-placement tampering. The car reads like a stage set left untouched between rehearsals. If there were changes, they weren't obvious enough to change the timeline. All of this folds back into the map. The home pins the last known presence. The audit in the previous chapter strips out the 12-day travel claim. The lot establishes posture and duration. When you put those lines together, the case becomes narrower than it felt on day one. We're not tracking a multi-state journey, we're resolving a 5-mile gap in a familiar city. That kind of compression is how no-body cases move. You trade spectacle for sequence. When the sequence holds, juries listen. There's a human reality under the charts. A sedan that once hauled school projects and groceries is now an object lesson about time. It's clinical work to read corrosion, but it serves a family that needs certainty. People deserve answers that don't depend on speculation. The car surfaces are telling them what they can. This wasn't a road trip that fizzled. It was a placement meant to be discovered after enough days had passed to sell a story. With this clock set, investigators can now align interviews to it. They pull maintenance logs to see when property staff last patrolled rows. They ask tenants who park nearby if anything changed on their routines. They compare the likely drop-off window with known obligations on the calendar at home. You don't need a dramatic reveal. You need one honest truth at a time, each one anchored to a thing you can see, count, or photograph. That's how cases like this cross the line from worry to proof. I'll end this segment with one brief note for anyone watching in communities like this. When something feels off in your lot, a car that appears out of place for days, report it. No one wants to be the neighbor who calls too soon. But in cases like this, time is a form of evidence. Preserving it is an act of care, not intrusion. When the Volvo's timeline is fixed, the case turns from a still object to moving people. We watch what happens after the car is found in early September 1996. Within weeks, household routines in Forest Hills change. Mail forwarding appears. A new address in the Chicago area, Wilmette, enters the paperwork. This isn't rumor, it's traceable activity. Forwarding requests, school inquiries for 2 young children, and utility starts are the kind of administrative footprints that don't argue, they confirm. Relocation isn't a crime. But in a no-body disappearance, movement matters because it can show what a person prioritizes when scrutiny increases. Investigators build a clean ladder. The Forest Hills residence remains the last known location for Janet Gail Levine March. The Brixworth lot is the vehicle scene that suggests staging. And now documents show the family base shifting out of Tennessee. The question is not why a family would want stability. The question is whether the timing fits the story we already tested and found unsupported. Records from Illinois give a baseline. A lease application is dated after the disappearance window. School offices in Wilmette note contact about enrollment. Insurance and banking statements begin to route north. Officers don't add commentary, they timestamp. When a case has no recovered body, you lean on what can be stamped and filed. Each form is a small piece of momentum away from the place where the person vanished. Detectives separate practical needs from narrative benefit. A practical need is clear. Children must attend school, bills need addresses. A narrative benefit is different. Distance blunts questions from neighbors and family who know the old routines. You don't assign intent, you map effect. The effect here is consistent. The center of gravity for the household leaves Nashville soon after the Volvo is located. The team then tracks travel outside the country. Mexico becomes the next waypoint. You confirm that kind of move with immigration entries, passport use, or the paper glow that follows any cross-border life, housing, employment filings, local IDs. Again, there's nothing theatrical about it. It is movement that can be corroborated without speculation. Combined with the lack of any credible signal from Janet after August 15, 1996, the result is a 2-line picture. The missing person remains fixed in Tennessee. The living circle expands far away. There's a secondary reason to dwell on movement. It creates new witnesses. New landlords, new principals, new neighbors. In long cases, fresh witnesses often provide neutral detail because they have no stake in old conflicts. Investigators send routine inquiries, not fishing for gossip but for observable behavior, schedules kept, comments made, quick mentions of the past. This is where many nobody files gain the consciousness of scrutiny notes, people explaining, justifying, or preempting questions before they're asked. Those remarks don't prove guilt. They can, however, prove awareness. None of this changes what we've already locked. There is still no defined assault scene. There is still no recovered body. What changes is weight. When a spouse says someone left for a long break and, at the same time, uproots children, opens a new household, and eventually establishes life outside the United States, with no verified contact from the missing person, the theory of a voluntary trip becomes harder to defend. The investigation does not call that conclusion, the documents do. From a human angle, this is the part that often tests families the most. Distance isn't just miles, it's fewer eyes on the original case. People watching who've lived something similar know how quickly attention shifts when a home empties and a new address appears on envelopes. That's why the paper trail is essential. It replaces memory with sequence. So the file grows, not with dramatic finds, but with ordinary proofs of movement. Tennessee to Illinois. Illinois to Mexico. Each step is logged next to the fixed points we already built, last known at home, staged vehicle at Brixworth. The lines don't cross, they diverge. In our work, that's often the shape you see before a cold case tips. You remove alternate explanations until one remains that fits the map and the calendar. The file stops being only a missing person case when the evidence can stand without a body. By late 2004, after 8 years of interviews, records pulls, and travel documentation, the chain is strong enough for a Davidson County grand jury to act. A sealed indictment issues, charging homicide and related counts tied to disposal and evidence handling. That shift doesn't happen because someone feels certain, it happens because the provable sequence now outweighs the alternative. Prosecutors rebuild the case from durable anchors, the way a jury will eventually see it. Last known at home on August 15, 1996. Vehicle located 3 weeks later at Brixworth, backed in and undisturbed. No credible financial, phone, or travel activity by Janet after that date. Household relocation out of Tennessee and then abroad while the missing person never reappears. None of those points alone proves homicide. Together, they remove the voluntary departure story from the reasonable set. For a no-body case, the legal test at indictment is probable cause, a fair probability that a crime occurred and that the defendant committed it. The state doesn't need to show where a body is, how it was concealed, or every minute on the clock. It needs a coherent narrative made of facts that survive cross-examination, placement of the car consistent with staging, a silent trail for the person who allegedly left. Movements and actions by the spouse that are inconsistent with a partner expecting contact. The absence of genuine sightings, credible communications, or verified transactions by the missing person for years becomes a form of proof. Investigators also tighten witness layers that didn't exist in 1996. Friends and family describe ordinary planning that contradicts a sudden 12-day break. New landlords, school officials, and neighbors provide neutral observations about life after Nashville, useful not for opinion, but for time-stamped behavior. Any statements made about the disappearance are cataloged precisely, when they were said, to whom, and whether they changed over time. Shifts in telling are not a verdict, they are a credibility problem the grand jury is allowed to weigh. Physical evidence remains what it is, a car that sat, not a room that bled. In a case like this, prosecutors don't promise the lab will answer questions the scene could not. Instead, they lean on forensic chronology, rust, dust, cobwebs, as reliable indicators of non-movement, document trails, mail, leases, utilities, border entries, as reliable indicators of movement by everyone else. The two timelines never converge. That divergence is the state's core exhibit. Sealing the indictment serves a practical purpose while authorities coordinate custody and travel issues. It prevents flight and preserves the integrity of planned steps while the case transitions from investigation to prosecution. When the charging document is unsealed, the charges read plainly, homicide in a no-body context, with counts that reflect acts taken after the death to hide or destroy evidence. The message to a future jury is straightforward. A person doesn't simply erase all traces of life while the other half of the household rebuilds in new jurisdictions. From a human angle, this moment often brings families a difficult kind of relief. They still don't have remains to lay to rest. What they do have is formal recognition that the system sees what they've lived with since 1996. The only story that fits the facts is a criminal one. After the sealed indictment in late 2004, the case stops living on paper. Warrants are executed, custodial steps are documented, and the defendant is brought under Tennessee jurisdiction. Identity is confirmed, transport is logged, and the charging document is unsealed. From there, the work is procedural and exact, arraignment, bond arguments, and a schedule that moves the file toward a jury without promising evidence the case never had. No new scene is invented. The record stays anchored to what can be proved. Pretrial motions shape what jurors will hear. The state's case is a sequence, not a slogan. Last known at home on August 15, 1996, the Volvo placed at Brixworth and left undisturbed, no verified calls, banking, or travel by Janet after that date, swift relocation out of Tennessee and, later, out of the United States by the spouse. Custodians authenticate documents, technical witnesses explain why the car reads as staged, friends and colleagues speak to routine plans that contradict a sudden, secret 12-day break. None of these witnesses has to fill in a missing room. They simply keep the chain unbroken. Jury selection focuses on a single rule: circumstantial evidence can prove a homicide beyond a reasonable doubt. The state doesn't ask jurors to imagine what can't be shown. It asks them to weigh what never changed: Janet's life stops in Nashville, and what changed immediately around it: school, mail, leases, and borders for everyone else. The defense presses the gaps: no body, no blood pattern seen, the chance of voluntary departure. The answers return to time, placement, and silence. A person who chooses to start over leaves a trail. A person who is gone leaves none. Openings are brief and disciplined. Direct examinations track the investigation's spine without rehashing earlier chapters: home as last known, a car positioned to be found later rather than sooner, a complete absence of authentic contact from the missing person, and documented movement by the household. Cross-examinations probe alternative explanations. The record holds. There are no credible sightings, no authenticated messages, and no transactions by Janet after August 15, 1996. There is, instead, a clean administrative arc that moves the defendant farther from the place where her life ends. When the case is charged out to the jury, the court instructs on no body law. The state does not need a recovered body if the total proof closes all reasonable exits. Deliberations request the timeline boards, the bank/phone summaries, and the lot diagram. They do not ask for a reconstruction that never existed. In 2006, the verdict is guilty, and the sentence is 56 years. Appeals and post-conviction filings follow in the years after, as they often do, but the judgment stands. As of October 30, 2025, Janet's remains have not been found. There isn't a second ending. This is the ending the evidence supports: a no-body homicide proven by chronology, placement, and an unbroken silence. For families and communities, the lesson is practical and humane. Report the car that sits too long. Keep calendars, messages, and receipts. Ordinary records, kept faithfully and checked early, can deliver accountability when traditional forensics cannot. Justice, here, wasn't a single dramatic find. It was a straight line that never bent. I've walked you through the facts because truth deserves steady light. Cases like Janet's remind me that safety starts with small actions: check on neighbors, report the car that sits too long, keep messages and receipts. Those simple habits save time, and sometimes lives. What did this case teach you about paying attention? If this story reached you, subscribe to see crime stories and stay with us. Tell me where you're watching from, or, if this video didn't work for you, say why and how you found it. Your voice shapes what we make next.